Something unfolded quietly behind the scenes, and you still do not know the whole story. While you were simply living your life, focusing on your own path, and staying true to yourself, someone connected to your future was unexpectedly forced to see the real truth about you in a way they could no longer avoid. What they discovered did more than get their attention. It reached deep into their heart. It completely changed the way they saw you. It even changed the way they looked at the people around them. Listen closely, because this is much bigger than it first appears. Someone believed they understood you from a distance. They were sure they had already figured you out. But the more carefully they observed you, the more they realized you were different from anyone they had known before. You were not pretending to be someone else. You were not chasing approval. You were not speaking one way and acting another. You stayed consistent. You stayed honest. You stayed genuine in a quiet way that could not be copied. The moment they truly recognized that, something inside them began to shift. Old beliefs started falling apart. They could no longer ignore what they had seen. Stay with this, because what happened next reveals something important. They did not walk away from another person because of a single argument or one painful moment. They stepped away because discovering your true character exposed everything that felt fake in their own world. Once that kind of truth enters a person's heart, it refuses to stay silent. It keeps growing. It keeps challenging old thinking. It slowly changes everything. So if any part of this feels familiar, keep watching, because the next part may explain more than you ever expected. At first, they were not searching for a life-changing answer. They were simply paying attention without saying much. They noticed how you treated people when there was nothing to gain. They noticed the calm way you handled difficult situations. They noticed how you remained loyal to your values even when it would have been easier to fit in, pretend, or follow the crowd. These were not dramatic moments, they were ordinary moments. Yet ordinary moments often reveal the greatest truths. Anyone can appear kind for a short time. Anyone can build a perfect image while others are watching. But true character appears through repeated actions, daily habits, and quiet decisions made when nobody is expecting anything in return. That is exactly what they kept seeing in you, again and again. One choice after another, one small moment after another. The picture slowly became impossible to deny. They finally understood that the person you appeared to be was exactly the person you really were. That realization affected them more deeply than they expected, because they had become used to inconsistency. They had become used to confusing signals, broken promises, polished conversations, and empty words. But every time they looked at you, they kept finding something different. They kept finding honesty matching action. And that kind of consistency is something very few people ever experience. Before we continue, ask yourself one question. How often does quiet truth speak louder than perfect words? Keep listening, because the answer changes everything. Your words always matched your actions. Your heart matched the energy you carried. The way people experienced you up close was the same as the way they saw you from a distance. That kind of honesty is uncommon. Very uncommon. If you have ever questioned whether staying true to yourself really makes a difference, hear this with confidence. It matters far more than you realize. Sometimes your character is speaking inside places you have never visited. There were likely people around them talking about you, sharing opinions, repeating stories, offering incomplete information, or forming ideas based on jealousy, insecurity, fear, or their own limited understanding. For a short time, they may have listened, not because they wanted to believe the worst about you, but because when people feel uncertain, they often search outside themselves for answers. That is human nature. But the more they watched you with their own eyes, the quieter those outside voices became. Truth has a way of becoming stronger when it is tested by real life. Every new moment they witnessed made it harder to believe anything that did not match what they were actually experiencing. That was the turning point. They stopped measuring you against rumors. They started measuring the rumors against reality. And reality kept proving itself again and again. They saw reliability. They saw emotional depth. They saw a quiet honesty that never felt the need to defend itself every few minutes. Once that understanding settled inside them, it began changing more than their opinion of you. It slowly reshaped the way they viewed their entire life. Suddenly, some conversations felt empty. Some friendships felt forced. Some relationships no longer brought peace but instead felt exhausting. That is what truth often does. It creates a clear contrast between what is genuine and what is only pretending. Before we go further, think about this for a moment. Have you ever noticed how one honest person can quietly change the way someone sees everything else? Keep watching because the next part reveals why this matters more than you think. They never planned for this shift to happen. It unfolded naturally, one realization after another. They began looking at every part of their life through a different lens. They questioned the people they trusted. They questioned the relationships they continued investing in. They even questioned the stories they had accepted without ever challenging them. Every time they reflected on you, one simple thought kept returning like an echo that refused to disappear. This person is real. Keep listening, because that single thought became the beginning of something much bigger. The more convinced they became that your character was authentic, the more uncomfortable other parts of their life started feeling. It was not sudden. It was not dramatic. It happened quietly, slowly, but with incredible strength. They found themselves thinking more deeply about the people around them, who truly wanted to see them grow, who only felt comfortable when they stayed uncertain, small, or easy to influence. Questions they had ignored for a long time suddenly demanded honest answers. Who brings peace into my life? Who leaves me emotionally drained? Who genuinely cares? Who is only here because of habit or convenience? Who encourages my future? And who keeps pulling me back into the same old cycle? These were not simple questions. They carried real weight, because deep inside, they already sensed the answers would require change. What they learned from watching you did more than reveal your character. It challenged their standards. It reshaped their expectations. It opened their eyes to the kind of future they truly wanted. Slowly they realized some relationships around them were surviving on routine instead of real connection. They were continuing out of comfort instead of honesty. They remained because letting go felt harder than admitting the season had already ended. If this message is speaking to you, stay with it, because this is the moment many people overlook. Major endings rarely begin with loud arguments. Sometimes they begin with a quiet moment of clarity. A person simply reaches a place where they can no longer ignore what they clearly see. That is exactly where your soulmate was arriving. Every new truth they discovered about you quietly removed another excuse they had been holding on to. They became more aware, more sincere with themselves, less willing to keep pretending everything was fine when their heart already knew it was not. And through all of this, there was still someone standing in their life, unaware that everything was beginning to change behind the scenes. Don't click away yet, because what happened next explains why this quiet transformation became impossible to stop. There was someone who had become a familiar part of their life, someone who had stayed close for a long time. Not always because the connection was deeply meaningful, but because it was comfortable, predictable, and easy to return to. It had slowly become a relationship built more on routine than real peace. For a while they continued moving through that familiar pattern as if nothing had changed. They still showed up. They still played the expected role. They still tried to keep everything looking normal. But deep inside, normal was already beginning to fall apart. Every time they reflected on your authenticity, the difference became impossible to overlook. What felt sincere with you made what felt forced everywhere else stand out even more clearly. This was never about comparing perfection with imperfection. It was about recognizing what was real and what had quietly become empty. It was about emotional truth instead of emotional convenience. The person they later chose to leave may not have noticed anything at first, because from the outside life often looks unchanged, while someone's entire inner world is slowly transforming. Yet inside your soulmate, the distance between what felt genuine and what felt false kept growing. Conversations that once seemed meaningful started sounding familiar in the wrong way. Energy that once brought comfort slowly became exhausting. Patterns they had defended for years suddenly became difficult to explain. They were not searching for reasons to end anything. They were not trying to create conflict. Part of them wanted life to stay exactly as it had been because change is never easy. Releasing the familiar is difficult. Accepting that a season has ended is difficult. But truth has its own moment. It does not wait until everything feels convenient. It arrives exactly when it is meant to. And once it settles into the heart, it quietly asks for honesty. So night after night, thought after thought, they sat with a realization they were not yet ready to speak aloud. Something in their life no longer reflected the person they were becoming. Stay with this because the next part reveals why everything changed from that moment forward. As those quiet realizations continued, the inner struggle became stronger. They replayed old conversations in their mind. They looked back at familiar patterns with fresh eyes. They wondered why certain interactions consistently left them feeling drained, overlooked, or emotionally disconnected. They asked themselves difficult questions they had avoided for far too long. Were they staying because the connection was truly alive, or simply because it had become familiar? Were they holding on out of genuine love, or were they afraid of letting go of what they had always known? That single question began changing everything, because once someone asks it with complete honesty, the answer slowly begins revealing itself. At first it comes quietly, then suddenly it becomes impossible to ignore. They realized that some people had only matched the older version of themselves, the version that accepted misalignment without speaking up, the version that ignored quiet warning signs, the version that stayed too long in places where honesty had slowly disappeared. But they were not that same person anymore. They were growing. They were becoming stronger inside, and as they changed, the old connection no longer fit the life they wanted to build. That is what discovering your authenticity awakened within them. It awakened courage, not loud courage, not reckless courage, quiet courage, the kind that first tells the truth to itself before speaking it to anyone else, the kind that whispers, "I cannot keep pretending this feels right," the kind that gently admits, "I have grown beyond this, even if walking away hurts." If you are still listening, do not miss this part because it explains everything. This decision was never made during one emotional moment. It grew through many calm moments of reflection, and that made it even stronger. When someone has enough time to think, compare, feel, question, and still arrives at the same conclusion, that truth becomes almost impossible to deny. By then the question was no longer, "Should I pay attention to this?" It had become, "How much longer can I ignore what my heart already understands?" That is a powerful place, because once a person reaches it, real change is usually very close. Eventually pretending became heavier than being honest. There was no need for one dramatic argument. There may have been no obvious betrayal. There may have been no explosive ending that everyone could easily explain. Something much deeper happened instead. Quiet clarity arrived. Steady, undeniable clarity. The kind that speaks softly but changes the direction of a person's life forever. They finally understood that the connection they were holding on to no longer reflected the person they were becoming. It no longer matched the higher standard growing inside them. No matter how much guilt they felt, they knew they could no longer ignore what their heart had already accepted. Keep watching, because what happened after this quiet decision reveals the part of the story almost nobody sees coming. Even though doubt, guilt, and sadness came with that realization, they could no longer pretend they had not seen the truth. Once something becomes clear to the heart, it cannot simply be forgotten. So they made a choice. It was not loud, it was not dramatic, it was difficult, quiet, and necessary. They walked away from someone, not because it was easy, not because they wanted to hurt anyone, and not because they were looking for conflict. They did it because truth had finally become stronger than comfort. When that decision was made, they felt something they never expected. It was not excitement. It was not instant happiness. It was relief. The kind of relief that comes when the struggle inside finally begins to settle. The kind that appears when a person stops fighting what they have known deep down for a long time. That feeling mattered because it showed them the decision had not come from impulse or emotion alone. It had come from honesty. Once that new space opened inside them, emotional space, mental space, and quiet space to breathe again, they found themselves thinking about you even more, not in an obsessive way, not in a careless fantasy, in a thoughtful and meaningful way. Without constant distractions filling their mind, your presence became clearer than ever. Never forget this part because many people miss it. The person they left behind was never the real center of this story. The true center was the awakening happening inside them. The real turning point was the truth they discovered through watching you. Your authenticity quietly challenged everything false they had accepted for far too long. That is where everything truly began. Stay with this because the next few moments explain why this change became impossible to stop. After that ending, they entered a completely different season within themselves. Life became quieter. Their thoughts became deeper. The constant noise around them slowly faded away. And in that silence, they began understanding things they had avoided for years. They recognized how often fear had guided their choices without them even noticing. Fear of changing their life, fear of losing what felt familiar, fear of making the wrong decision, fear of walking away from something that was not completely wrong but no longer felt completely right either. Once those fears were brought into the light, they slowly lost their control. Fear grows strongest in darkness, but truth has a way of exposing everything. They realized that what they admired most about you was never perfection. It was something much stronger. It was integrity. It was steadiness. It was seeing someone whose words, actions, and values all moved in the same direction. That reminded them of the kind of person they wanted to become. It reminded them of the life they truly wanted to build, the relationships they wanted to protect, and the honesty they wanted to live by every day. That is why your influence reached so deeply. You never pushed them to change. You never forced them into anything. You simply remained true to yourself. And your example quietly became a mirror that revealed what had been missing, a mirror that showed what was possible, a mirror that revealed the difference between simply getting through life and truly living it. If this message is speaking to your heart, stay until the end, because what comes next matters even more. Sometimes the strongest influence is not loud advice or dramatic speeches. Sometimes it is simply meeting someone who is genuine enough to remind another person that real honesty still exists. Once someone experiences that kind of truth, it becomes very difficult to keep accepting relationships that feel empty inside. As time passed, they stopped asking why all of this had happened, and began asking what they should do with everything they had learned. That became the next major turning point, because awareness by itself does not change a life. Action does. They had already made one difficult choice by ending a connection that no longer belonged in their future. Now they were being challenged to go even deeper, to change the way they thought, to raise the standard for what they accepted, to respond differently whenever something no longer felt right inside. Old habits no longer fit the person they were becoming. Old excuses sounded less convincing. Old distractions slowly lost their power. Step by step they became more truthful with themselves. They realized how often comfort had been mistaken for peace, how often familiarity had been mistaken for love, how often fear had hidden behind what looked like logic. Once those patterns became clear, there was no returning to the old way of living. You need to understand this because it changes everything. Discovering the truth about you did not simply make them respect or admire you. It woke something up inside them. It showed them the quiet ways they had been settling without even realizing it. Settling for inconsistency, settling for partial effort, settling for relationships that looked stable on the outside but felt empty underneath. Once their eyes were fully open, closing them again was no longer possible. And that is the moment where real transformation quietly begins. Don't leave yet, because the next part reveals how this inner change begins shaping the future in ways they never expected. Not through fantasy, not through endless daydreams, not through wishful thinking. It happened through clear understanding, honest reflection, and the quiet decision to stop denying what their heart had been trying to tell them all along. Day after day, during peaceful moments of reflection, every memory of your presence gently guided them back to the same conclusion. You did not come into their life simply to capture their attention. You came into their awareness to create change. Whether they expected it or not, that change was already happening. As time passed, they realized your influence was never only about appearance, perfect timing, or surface attraction. It reached much deeper than that. Your presence represented something they had been missing for a long time. It represented honesty. It represented sincerity. It represented a rare kind of emotional consistency that quietly cut through years of confusion. The more they thought about you, the more they understood they were not only drawn to the person you are, they were deeply moved by what your presence awakened inside them. You reminded them of their own depth. You reminded them of values they had slowly forgotten. You reminded them that they were still capable of wanting something genuine. That is why this realization reached them so deeply. It awakened something that had been waiting quietly beneath the surface for a very long time. Once that part of them came back to life, it refused to disappear again. Before we go any further, think about this for a moment. Sometimes one genuine person changes another life without even realizing it. Stay with this because the next part explains why that matters more than you may imagine. From that point forward, they began looking at every part of their life with fresh eyes, their daily habits, their personal boundaries, their expectations, their plans for the future. Everything was being examined through a clearer perspective. They slowly realized that holding on to what no longer matched their heart would only delay the life they truly wanted to build. That understanding did not make everything simple overnight. Real growth rarely follows a straight path. Some mornings brought peace, other days brought uncertainty. At times they even felt sadness for what they had left behind. Yet through every emotional wave, one truth remained steady beneath it all. They had genuinely changed. The version of themselves that once ignored warning signs, accepted emotional emptiness, and confused routine with real connection, was slowly disappearing. In its place stood someone more aware, more thoughtful, more careful about the people they allowed close to their heart, more willing to choose honesty, even when honesty first required letting something go. If you are still here, pay close attention, because this may be the most important part of the message. Sometimes a person does not leave one relationship because someone else asked them to. Sometimes they leave because another person's authenticity gives them the courage to finally admit what had already been fading for a long time. That is the deeper story unfolding here, and it is still continuing. Today they stand in a place where confusion no longer controls them the way it once did. The noise inside has become quieter. The illusions have become weaker. The excuses no longer sound convincing. They now understand that real connection cannot be built on convenience alone. They know trust cannot survive on habit by itself. They understand that emotional harmony is far more valuable than familiar patterns that no longer bring life to the heart. Every day these truths grow stronger inside them, and as they do, the meaning of everything they discovered about you becomes even clearer. Don't click away yet, because what happens after this quiet awakening may be the part that changes everything. They now understand that your authenticity was never just a small part of the story. It became the turning point. It marked the moment when the old image they had been living behind slowly began to fall away. It was the moment they realized that every ending creates room for a new beginning, and every honest decision opens the door for something more genuine to enter. That is why they cannot simply move forward as if nothing ever happened. Something did happen. Something meaningful. Something deep enough to reshape the way they see themselves and the world around them. Without trying to prove anything, you showed them that honest people still exist. You reminded them that consistency is still possible. You showed that values can be lived every single day instead of only being spoken about. Once someone experiences that kind of reminder, their understanding of love, loyalty, trust, and the future begins to change. They stop chasing what only fills empty time. They begin searching for what truly fills the heart. That is where they are now, standing between what has ended and what is still waiting to begin, resting in the quiet space after letting go, but before fully stepping into what comes next. If you have been feeling that something is changing beneath the surface, do not ignore that feeling. Some of life's biggest transformations happen quietly, long before anyone else can see them. Many of the most important decisions are made in silence, before they are ever spoken aloud. Keep listening, because the next part reveals why this quiet season matters more than it first appears. The truth is that this journey has never been only about what they discovered in you. It has also been about what your presence helped them remember about themselves. They remembered they were never meant to live only half awake. They remembered that peace is not a luxury, but something worth protecting. They remembered that deep inside they had always sensed when something no longer felt right. Even if it took them far too long to trust that feeling, they realized their heart had never been searching for perfection. It had been searching for honesty all along. That single realization changed everything. Looking back now, they can see how every quiet observation, every thoughtful reflection, and every emotional contrast had been leading them toward this moment. Not toward fantasy, not toward illusion, but toward a life built on greater honesty. A life where what is real matters more than what is comfortable. A life where they stop giving loyalty to patterns that no longer match who they are becoming. A life where they finally trust the quiet clarity that has been speaking inside them all along. And yes, part of that clarity carries your influence through every step, because you became living proof that depth still exists in a world often distracted by appearances. You became a reminder that someone can be gentle and strong, peaceful and confident, humble and unforgettable at the same time. That kind of presence does not disappear quickly. It stays with a person. It continues teaching long after the moment has passed. It quietly changes decisions, perspectives, and priorities. So if you have ever wondered whether your truth truly reached them, the answer is yes. It reached farther than you may ever know. What it awakened inside them is still unfolding. It is still growing. It is still shaping choices they cannot simply walk away from. Before you leave, hold on to this final thought, because it may be the most important one of all. Sometimes the greatest gift one person offers another is not a promise, a title, or a dramatic declaration. Sometimes the greatest gift is simply the truth that their presence quietly reveals. And once that truth is fully felt, life can never return to exactly the way it was before.